Hi, today I'm going to be talking about the language of joy. At the outset of this project, we were told to think outside of the box when it comes to joy so that we can discover things that science hadn't already picked apart and categorized. I thought that was interesting because what's the box? It's hard to think outside of something when you don't know what it is. And so I began thinking about what are the limitations on our understanding of joy. And when I began to think about that, I said, okay, what's the main thing that limits us every single time we try and talk about joy? And that would be language, because when you talk, you have to use language. So what does language do when it's interacting with joy? And that was my starting point for this project. So my starting questions were, what does the linguistic history of joy and the development of its definition say about the emotion and how we treat it today? And then I had, what are the roots of the word joy? What journey did the word take to get where it is today? And linguistically, in what context is joy currently used the most? So my road to discovery, so to speak, and how I went about this project. At first, I don't really know that much about linguistics, so I emailed a linguistic professor here at New York University, Dr. Gary Toms, and he directed me to start on my research, where I researched about the history and the roots of the word joy. Now, I also wanted to get a more modern conception of how the people surrounding me and the general public think about joy. So to do that, I created a survey, and then from there, I analyzed both the survey and the research within context of each other to see what I could learn from them both. Now, the journey of joy. So let's start with the research. How did joy get to be where it is today? So, like most words, when you look up the root of them, they give you where it started in Latin. So the Latin root of the word joy is gaudium. Now gaudium can be split into God and iam. God is the base for the verb gauder, which means to rejoice, to enjoy, or to be glad. Now, the Romans took this Latin noun gaudium and turned it into gaudia. They shortened it, as people like to do with language. And then the French, it made its way over to France, and the French took the G sound and softened it so it became a J, and so it turned into joie, which then was transformed in Middle English to become joy, which then became what we know now as joy. So it's all very interesting, right, how language transforms and moves. Looking further into the development of the meaning of joy, I think it's really crucial to look at the Christian religion and the church. Joy is super important to Christianity. It's mentioned 133 times in the New Testament alone, depending on what version you use. Sometimes it's a little above or below. But joy is one of the fruits of the Spirit in Christianity. And the church itself is such a huge cultural influence that it cannot be understated the impact that it has on people's definitions and understanding and perceptions of concepts. So the church in Christianity actually defines joy not as something spontaneous that happens, but as more as a contented state of peace and satisfaction that comes with being in relation to God and knowledge of the Holy Spirit. So I think this is interesting because I believe this to be a major influence in why some people today think of joy as a sense and a state of satisfaction, of contentment, of just bliss. I think that has high potential to come from the definition of joy in Christianity. Now, another very important player in the changing definition of joy over time is John Locke. Why? Well, because John Locke's description of joy as a delight of the mind from the consideration of the present or assured approaching possession of a good was used by Samuel Johnson in his first A Dictionary of the English Language. It was listed as the first illustrative quotation under the word joy. Now this matters because Samuel Johnson's A Dictionary of the English Language was one of the first dictionaries to standardize the English language, and it set the standard for many dictionaries that we still use today, and so it greatly influenced the public's perception and definition of joy, which leads us to a modern dictionary that was influenced by Samuel Johnson's Dictionary.com, which defines joy as the emotion of great delight or happiness caused by something exceptionally good or satisfying, keen pleasure or elation. This is very similar to John Locke's description. Now, why does this matter? Like, why do we care about language, and why do we care about how the word and its definition has developed? Well, to that, I'm going to turn to the survey I sent out. So the survey I sent out got 30 responses, and one of the questions on the survey asked people if they were familiar with the term for joy in a different language. 16 of those people said yes. 12 out of the 16 also said that term or terms felt different to them when they expressed joy in that language. So their perception of joy was changed by the language they were using. This is really interesting, and I think it could be related as well to the roots of the words. So as we discussed, the Latin word gaudium evolved into the English word joy. But the Latin word laetitia, which is a more effervescent, a more expressive, delightful term of joy in Latin, evolved into the French word allégresse, the Spanish word alegria, and the Italian word allegrezza, which I think could have a profound impact on people's perception of those terms as they use them today. So language matters, right? It changes how we view things, it changes how we feel things. So it's important, we need to pay attention to it. So the survey also asks for people to create a one-sentence definition of joy, and there was a wide variety of responses, but they generally fell into 5 categories. Joy as a feeling of happiness, joy as a state of contentment, bliss, or satisfaction, again calling back to those Christian roots, joy as a result of positive memories or moments, joy as a spontaneous or surprising euphoria, and joy as a feeling of freedom. The survey also asked people to name 3 synonyms and 3 antonyms. The top synonyms were happiness, delight, and elation, and the top antonyms were despair, sadness, and misery. I think this is really interesting. So despair was the top antonym for joy. And despair is defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as a complete loss or absence of hope. So if the antithesis of joy is a complete loss or absence of hope, what does that tell us about joy? Is it more closely correlated to hope than we would originally think of? This is really interesting, but I'm not going to go into today, but I would love to do some further exploration on that. So the box, we've kind of done the start, the journey, where we're at today. But what is this box? What is these walls that we've put ourselves in when it comes to thinking about and looking into joy? Well, according to the survey, this box is our brain. Because of the 30 definitions that were given to me via the survey, and plenty of the dictionary definitions I looked at, not one looked at joy through a bodily expressive manner first. So we really put ourselves in a cognitive box when it comes to thinking about emotions and joy in particular. I think this is to our profound deficit. If we can look at joy from a different way, from a form of bodily expression first, what would that tell us about it? And so of course this is science, so I ended up with more questions that I started with, but really what this led me to question is, what does this mean for the way we study and define emotions? The fact that we always approach it from a cognitive level first. And then how can we move to adapt our experimentation to better accommodate a wider scope of experiences? And what would we then learn from that? And what would we discover if instead of starting with a word to define, we began with a sensation to describe? Now I have a feeling science is probably already asking these questions because it's part of the ideology of science to question our beliefs and see what we're missing. But for the layperson, for the general public, what would it do for them to realize this deficit in our thinking? Would it change our perception of joy? Would it adapt joy instead of being just something that happens upon us? Could it become an experience that we create and therefore put more autonomy in our own hands? I think that could be really interesting, and I think that could positively benefit a lot of people. So more to look into, more questions to ask, but thank you. And that's the language of joy.